In the earliest stretch of galactic memory, light had no doctrine and darkness no shape. The stars moved without meaning, their constellations unobserved. Sentient minds had not yet risen to ask why, only to witness what was. Yet somewhere in that unfolding silence, life reached into the unseen and touched something vast. The Force was not discovered. It was noticed, felt first as intuition, as patterns beneath thought. It stirred in the breath of creatures learning to speak, in the tilt of seasons that obeyed no visible law. The galaxy offered no answer, but it listened. Tython emerged as the place where that listening became tradition. Violent storms raged across its skies, yet stillness often lay beneath. Mountains shifted their tone with emotion. The Force lived openly here. Travelers found themselves drawn from distant systems, not by summons, but by an ache they could not explain. They arrived without banners or teachings, each guided by some inner sense that the planet knew them. The earliest settlers did not form a single people. They built no cities. Small enclaves formed around caves, mesas, or regions where the current of the Force thickened. These enclaves spoke different tongues, practiced different rites. Still, when they gathered, conflict seldom followed. Something in the soil demanded respect. From this quiet convergence, a pattern emerged. The Jedi, those who sought balance rather than dominance, began to organize the wisdom scattered across the pilgrim groups. They mapped Tython storms. They recorded visions seen beneath eclipses. They taught one another to wield sabers not as weapons, but as reflections of thought. The Jedi did not speak of good and evil. They walked between Ashla and Bogan, names given to the Force's luminous and shadowed flows. Harmony was their aim, not purity. Too much light could burn just as deeply as darkness could consume. Temples rose across Tython, each built atop places where the Force spoke in its own language. One temple taught serenity, another, transformation. Pilgrims moved from site to site, never rooted too long. Clinging to a single idea brought imbalance. Only motion preserved the flow. Children were tested for their sensitivity early, not to assess power, but to guide them through discipline. Those who leaned toward passion were taught to observe without reacting. Those drawn to control learned release. No punishment followed imbalance, only retreat, meditation, and return. The planet itself responded to their growth. Tython welcomed balance and punished excess. When doctrine hardened or emotion overtook learning, the weather shifted. Lightning struck places once calm. Earthquakes followed pride. Over time, rifts deepened. Some among the Jedi spoke of light as salvation. Others began embracing the shadow's strength. What had begun as a shared journey turned into opposing beliefs. The storm that followed nearly shattered their order. Civil war came not from betrayal but from conviction. Jedi raised blades against one another, each believing they were protecting what had been sacred. Tython suffered beneath their war. The skies blackened for weeks. Temples fell into the ocean. The Force screamed. When the storm finally quieted, survivors stood among ruins. The path forward had split. Those who renounced the shadow named themselves Jedi. They vowed to serve peace, to cut away darkness wherever it lingered. Others vanished into the edges of the galaxy, carrying with them the belief that strength came through passion. In time, these exiles would forge a name of their own, Sith. But before these titles, before the fracture, the Force had simply been present. It had no allegiance. It offered vision and silence. Those who first reached for it had no understanding of what would follow. They asked no permission to listen. They sought no reward for knowing. One tree still marks the place where their earliest meeting took root. Its bark bears burned scars from the storm. Its limbs stretch toward suns, now catalogued in Republic star maps. Beneath its roots, the Force still pulses, calm, deep, unchanged. Tython remains quiet in most records. The galaxy does not often look back. But for those who follow the Force, the echoes can still be heard. In moments between thought, in choices shaped not by law, but by instinct. The current never left. Before Jedi, before Sith, there was only the current, and those who dared to feel it. The winds of Tython carried no names, only motion. They passed through canyons and over high plateaus, stirring the grass without aim. But in one valley, the air changed. It moved not freely, but with purpose, brushing the robes of those who had gathered to listen, not to each other, but to something beneath thought. They had come from stars far beyond Tython's sky, drawn not by war nor conquest, but by a feeling they could not explain. Each one had sensed it, an unseen thread between worlds, vibrant and vast, known only as the Force. It had no doctrine yet, no creed. It whispered to minds unclouded by definition. The settlers gave it space, not instruction. They studied its motion in the stone and silence, through meditation and trial. Over time, their curiosity found form in practice. The Jedi were not born with fire. They began with balance. Masters of both light and shadow, they did not split the Force into parts. Ashlar and Bogan, terms for light and dark, were names, not weapons. Each Jedi was taught to walk the path between them, to lean neither into passion nor denial. When emotion surged, it was not repressed, but understood. When clarity came, it was held gently, not clutched. Temples rose across Tython's surface, each one reflecting a facet of this balance. Calith, the center of thought. Bodhi for healing. Anil-Kesh for force manipulation. These structures were not fortresses but vessels, each one built in quiet reverence. The Jedi did not hoard knowledge. They walked with it, allowing it to change them. Among them were those who heard the Force with great intensity. They did not see visions, but felt alignments shift, like the pull of moons. One such student, Rajivari, questioned the teachings often. He believed harmony was not a fixed point, but a struggle. Others, like Garon-Jard, disagreed, trusting instead in stillness. These debates were welcomed. The Jedi Council was formed not to command, but to hold space for divergence. Their code was not carved in stone, but spoken in air. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no fear, there is power. I am the mystery of the storm, and in balance, I find peace. This mantra, whispered across Tython's surface, guided generations. It did not dictate behavior, it encouraged self-awareness. Younglings, called Padawans, were paired with rangers and scholars alike, each one tested in wilderness and reflection. Trials were not passed or failed. They were endured. For a time, the system worked. Tython pulsed with harmony. Its moons, Ashla and Bogan, maintained celestial tension. Storms rolled across plains, predictable in their violence. The Force flowed evenly, teaching the Jedi not control, but communion. But balance, once held, becomes something to defend. In time, the question of leanings returned, sharper now, with certainty replacing curiosity. Some began to speak of Ashla alone, lifting light as a path above others. Others drew toward Bogan, arguing that power came not from denial, but from embracing darkness. The Jedi, once a circle, began to stretch into an arc. Rajivari, once a teacher, withdrew from the council. His writings changed in tone. He spoke not of harmony, but of dominance. He warned that unity would lead to weakness, that the Force favored those who seized its truth. His followers, few but fervent, began to train apart. Their practices became less introspective. Meditation gave way to imposition. The council watched, but did not act. To intervene, they believed, would be to break their own code. Storms on Tython grew unpredictable. The moons shifted erratically. Some believed it was a warning. Others saw it as proof that the planet itself could not tolerate imbalance. When conflict came, it did not begin with war. It began with a disappearance. A temple found empty. A holocron stolen. A teacher never returned. The Jedi Order did not fall, but it fractured. Quietly, inevitably. The valley where they had once gathered grew silent again. Wind moved through the stones unchecked. The words once carried there faded into dust. Tython remained, but the unity it had held began to scatter. Across its surface, the Force still whispered. But now, it whispered different things to different hearts. Harmony once held sway, until belief diverged and peace learned to fracture. Tython knew storms. Its skies had long held thunder behind violet clouds, and its winds had swept across mountaintops with the force of judgment. But the storm that came in this age was different. It did not begin in the air or the soil. It began in conviction. The Jedi had walked carefully between two tides. Ashla, the luminous current that brought serenity and growth, and Bogan, the shadowed swell that offered passion and destruction. For a time, they honored both as part of a whole. Their temples stood in balance, equidistant from center and edge. Their blades were constructed not only to defend, but to reflect the tension they carried inside. But not all tensions can endure. It began with voices, thoughts spoken aloud in councils where silence had once ruled. Some argued that Bogan's call led only to ruin, that its fire, if left untended, would consume not just the user, but all around them. Others believed Ashla's clarity blinded. That peace without strength bred complacency. The debate did not end. It widened. Jedi scholars, once united in discipline, began to form circles within circles. Some practiced deeper meditation to mute what they saw as temptation. Others explored Bogan's depths more freely, claiming understanding required full descent. Doctrines once whispered began to be taught openly, carried between moons by students who now aligned themselves more with interpretation than tradition. A rift opened, not in the ground, but in allegiance. Those drawn to the light called themselves defenders of harmony. They saw deviation as disease and argued for purification. Those drawn to the dark embraced their fury, not as corruption, but as evolution. The Jedi Code, which once read as a guide, was now quoted like a weapon. Its words turned against itself. On the moons of Ashla and Bogan, temples grew cold. Teachers who had once traveled freely now met only behind closed doors. When disagreements turned to exile, exile turned to arms. Zendor, once a devoted practitioner of balance, stood at the center of the break. He questioned not just how the Force was used, but who had the right to define it. His followers began to abandon the center world, moving toward places where their interpretations could live unfettered. They forged weapons without council approval, crafted philosophies outside traditional texts. In time, they stopped returning to Tython altogether. The Jedi Council responded not with reconciliation, but with declaration. Those who walked too far into darkness would be named fallen. Those who spread Bogan's gospel would be hunted. Zendor was branded a traitor. His name struck from records, his teachings labeled heresy. But banishment did not erase belief. The fallen built ships. They found refuge beyond the Tython system, across stars that knew nothing of the old balance. They took with them not just tools, but lineage. Their descendants would later trace lines of descent not just through blood, but through anger. A wound had opened, and its bleeding would last centuries. On Tython, the Jedi reforged themselves. The balance they had once guarded became doctrine redefined. The central code evolved into something stricter. Ashla was elevated. Bogan feared. Temples were renamed. Training hardened. Questions grew dangerous. The Force had not changed, but how they met it had. In hidden places, some still tried to hold to the center. A few meditated not for power or peace, but simply to listen. They heard the same currents as before, Ashla whispering comfort, Bogan urging motion. But now, silence followed such insight. These voices faded beneath fear. No great battle marked the split. No final duel framed the schism in fire and death. What lingered was quieter, a turning away, a silence that stretched into exile. And from that quiet, two futures grew. One would build temples of light. The other would forge empires of flame. Neither would remember how close they once stood. The storm that split the sky would echo forever in the hearts of its children. The stars turned slowly over Tython, but the hearts of those who remained there turned faster. The Jedi, once balanced between day and night, had cracked into light and dark. What followed was not renewal, but retreat. In the wake of the schism, those who sought to preserve Ashla without Bogan gathered in quiet. They left not in shame, but in caution. The rift had taught them that even discipline could splinter, and even wisdom could be drowned by fire. Tython no longer served them. The storms had grown loud, and silence was needed once more. They boarded vessels carved with the sigils of their ancestors, engines whispering like chants at dusk. Across the expanse, they searched, not for dominion, but for a place where vision could settle without contest. They found it in the system of Adega, where a planet circled twin suns in quiet rhythm. It bore the name Ossus. There, cliffs watched over wide grasslands. Rivers moved without urgency. The force flowed without tremor, neither too bright nor too cold. The settlers stepped down onto its soil and did not speak at first. They placed their hands in the earth and closed their eyes. What they felt was not silence, but invitation. They began again, not as Jedi, but as Jedi. The name was drawn from old breath, a word once spoken in reverence, now carried with intention. The order did not claim to be new, it claimed to be renewed. It cast off the balance once demanded by the Jedi and aligned itself with the light. Ashla became their guide. Bogan, a lesson in restraint. Temples rose not to dominate the sky, but to reflect it. Stone halls curved with the land's contour. Libraries were carved deep into mountain roots. A central sanctum stood at the heart of it all, where the first crystal from Tython was laid beneath the floor. That crystal had once rested between balance and choice. Now, it glowed only with clarity. The Jedi Code, still young, took shape in scroll and speech. It cautioned against possession, warned of fear, urged serenity. The masters debated its phrasing with care, for they knew words carried power long after voices dimmed. Every line was a vow not to ascend, but to serve. Jedi trained with blades once meant only to reflect the inner current. Now, the sabers hummed with focused purpose. They were no longer neutral, they were aligned. Students were guided to master emotion, not to feed it. The Force was no longer a spectrum. It was a path, lit by discipline and shaped by intent. Among them rose figures who would become legend in their own time. Master Kala Bryn, who studied stars and translated constellations into meditations. Ters Sendon, whose bond with animals became the foundation of the Jedi connection to living things. And Rajivari, whose brilliance foreshadowed both greatness and sorrow. The Jedi on Ossus did not seek conflict. They spoke of defense, of guardianship, of harmony. But even in Sanctuary, the galaxy's reach proved long. Visitors came. Some bore gifts, others warnings. Whispers of the dark exiles who had crossed the void spread like fog across temples. Stories told of their hunger for control, their seduction of systems left vulnerable. A new name began to pass between Jedi lips. Sith. Ossus, once imagined as a refuge beyond harm, now felt the breath of approaching fire. The Jedi did not run. They listened. They learned. They lit beacons for allies and mapped the stars not only for exploration, but for defense. In time, the Jedi would fight. They would bleed. They would lose and rise again. But in these first decades on Ossus, they lived as they had once hoped to live on Tython, with clarity and care, guided by purpose rather than fear. The Order was not yet a force of galactic scale. It was still a song carried by a few voices, echoing through stone halls lit by twin suns. But it had form now. It had name. And in the silence after storm, that was enough. From sacred mountain to new temple, the Order set roots beyond the storm. In the hush of Ossus, where stars could be read like scriptures, the Jedi honed more than wisdom. Their hands, once used for meditation and healing, began shaping new instruments. The Force stirred differently now, more focused, more urgent. As galactic paths grew crowded with whispers of war, the Jedi turned their gaze inward and asked, how might purpose take form? Steel could not hold their calling. The blades of old warriors carried forward from Tython felt heavy with imbalance. A new weapon was needed, not for conquest, but for clarity. The answer would come not from invention alone, but from listening. Far from Ossus, deep within a world of endless frost, the crystals waited. Illum was not marked on every map. Those who found it did so through the current of the Force rather than calculation. Its surface appeared lifeless, but beneath ice lay caverns that hummed with unseen breath. Inside, crystals grew in silence, each attuned to the pulse of life beyond language. They were not mined, they were chosen. The first to stand in the caves of Illum did not come with tools. They came in meditation. When they reached out, the crystals sang, not in notes, but in resonance. Some sang with warmth, others with sharp clarity. Each Jedi found one, and only one, that answered. Back on Ossus, scholars and craftsmen joined the effort. The energy of the crystals needed form, and the Force would provide the pattern. They began to shape emitters and conduits, designing hilts that reflected discipline rather than vanity. No two were identical. Each hilt bore the touch of the one who had shaped it. The first sabers sparked with uncertainty. They required external power packs carried at the belt. The plasma hummed but did not always hold. Failures led to burns and near ruin, yet the Jedi endured. Through trial, they refined. Through error, they adapted. and through patience, they succeeded. When the blade held, weightless, humming, steady, the order changed. The lightsaber was not merely a weapon, it became a rite. The forging of the blade was woven into training. A Jedi did not inherit one. They journeyed, constructed, and connected. When the crystal bonded, the saber answered. It did not hiss with anger or scream with hunger. It spoke softly, like breath drawn through purpose. Training evolved alongside the blade. Forms of movement began to emerge. Ataru leapt and danced through wind. Soresu turned defense into stillness. Shi-Cho, the oldest, taught the foundation of restraint before aggression. These forms were not arts of domination. They were expressions of discipline. Masters began teaching not in theory alone, but through motion. Younglings studied kata by moonlight, watched by mentors who corrected only when needed. Every movement was meditation. Every strike was a question answered in silence. In time, the blade itself took on layers of meaning. It stood for peace kept through vigilance. It stood for clarity in chaos. Jedi did not draw their sabers in haste. To ignite the blade was to declare one's presence, not with pride, but with purpose. Ceremonies formed around the gathering. Padawans, once trained in breath and focus, were sent to Ilum to face the crystal caves alone. The journey became legend. Some took hours, others days. None returned unchanged. Those who succeeded emerged with a new presence. They carried not just a weapon, but a responsibility. The saber did not make them Jedi. It reminded them that they already were. The Sith, who would later mimic and distort the form, saw only the power. They focused on the crystal's strength, the blade's precision, the fear it could ignite. But for the Jedi, the blade remained a symbol, not of strength, but of service. Even centuries later, sabers forged in those early days still lay in temples. Some remained on Ossus, others placed in quiet shrines across distant systems. They were not displayed as trophies. They rested in shadow, untouched, humming faintly when visitors entered with clear minds. As new generations of Jedi arose, so too did the traditions that bound them. The saber became the bridge between philosophy and presence. In battle, it defended. In teaching, it guided. In stillness, it waited. No Jedi forged a blade without reflection. Each hilt bore more than craftsmanship. It bore intention. Crystals sang through the hands of the faithful, binding starfire to intention. The galaxy stirred with new order. Trade routes once fraught with piracy gave way to regulated passage. Star systems spoke to one another, not through gunships, but through councils. Coruscant, a luminous pillar among worlds, drew voices to its chambers and offered them a place to converge. What began as fragile diplomacy grew into shared governance. The Republic, still young, reached across stars with an outstretched hand, hopeful, trembling, determined. Peace, though desired, had not yet taken root. Beyond the rim, violence lingered in pockets. Civil disputes turned to sieges. Former warlords adapted into pirates. Entire colonies collapsed under the weight of old rivalries. The Senate spoke of order, but its voice reached only so far. Worlds cried out for protection, not in treaties, but in presence. The Jedi heard them. Until then, the Order had stood apart. Their temples were places of study and reflection, distant from the thrum of politics. But the Force pulled at them in new directions. Visions came to seers in Ossus and Jedi, warnings not of darkness alone, but of suffering born from neglect. The Jedi Council, once wary of entanglement, saw the shape of a galaxy that needed guidance beyond wisdom. A delegation journeyed to Coruscant. They came without fanfare, without weapons raised. Their robes marked no allegiance. Their steps carried purpose. They were received not as warriors, but as mystery. Most senators had heard of them in whispers. Few had met them in truth. The agreement unfolded not in speeches, but in shared necessity. The Jedi would not become soldiers. They would not carry titles within the Republic, but they would stand in its defense. Where war threatened, they would shield. Where corruption festered, they would illuminate. The Force, they said, bound all things, and the Republic was now a part of that binding. From that accord, a temple rose on Coruscant. Constructed atop one of the planet's sacred mountains, it stood apart from the Senate, yet overlooked its halls. Tall spires reached toward the stars. Meditation chambers stretched deep underground. Archives filled with holocrons and ancient scrolls became a treasury of galactic memory. Younglings trained in open courts while masters convened in rooms that echoed with stillness. The Jedi presence expanded, not in numbers, but in reach. Small enclaves formed on worlds across the mid and outer rim. Their arrival did not come with banners or declarations. They arrived to listen, to mediate, to observe. Blades remained sheathed. Peace was their armor. Conflicts quieted in their wake. Planetary leaders, once at odds, found pause when Jedi sat between them. Bandit clans disbanded under the watchful gaze of those who sought understanding rather than punishment. The galaxy did not change overnight, but where the Order walked, the pulse of violence slowed. Some questioned their neutrality. Senators wondered if the Jedi could truly serve the Republic without being bound to it. Others feared the mysticism they represented. Yet the results were undeniable. Where treaties failed, the Jedi endured. Their allegiance was not to systems, but to life. Their code adjusted, though never rewritten. Service now carried weight beyond the individual. Duty extended outward, not for power, but for balance. Younglings were taught that protection was not conquest, that intervention must always follow reflection. Coruscant itself shifted in their presence. Artisans sculpted new motifs into public halls, stars joined by luminous arcs, blades encircled in flame. The Jedi did not demand reverence. Still, reverence followed. Pilgrims arrived seeking wisdom. Diplomats arrived seeking counsel. The temple became both sanctuary and compass. Yet with reach came risk. Not all welcomed Jedi peace. Those who thrived in chaos, slavers, mercenaries, broken remnants of empires long buried, began to whisper of resistance. They saw not protectors, but watchers. The presence of the Jedi cast long shadows across secrets long kept hidden. Some Jedi fell in pursuit of justice. Missions meant to defuse war instead stirred ambush. In remote systems, temples were built only to be burned. The Order mourned, but did not withdraw. Retreat, they believed, would invite more suffering than resolve. In time, they adapted. Investigators were trained, diplomats too. Lightsabers were not enough. Knowledge became a tool more powerful than blade or decree. The Jedi learned languages lost to time, studied cultures not their own, and listened more than they spoke. What had begun as guardianship slowly shaped the Order itself. It was no longer enough to preserve balance within the Force alone. Now, they had to preserve it in the hearts of others. The weight of the galaxy began to settle on their shoulders. They bore it in silence. They stood not above the people, but beside them, until the shadows returned. The halls of the Jedi Temple grew silent when certain names were spoken. Among the Order's many scholars and warriors, a few had begun to question the nature of the Force, not to abandon the light, but to understand what lay beyond its edges. They saw healing in knowledge, truth in potential. The Code had served the Order for millennia, but for them, it had become a boundary rather than a guide. Their experiments did not begin in darkness. They sought new ways to preserve life, to conquer death, to transform suffering into power. Some used alchemy. Others reached into ancient texts buried beneath Ossus and Jedi. Slowly, their focus shifted. Their sabers grew heavier with meaning. Their minds turned towards secrets the Council had long kept buried. The Order took notice. Debates flared in the High Chamber. Warnings were issued. Records sealed. But discipline could not contain conviction. Those who walked too far from the sanctioned path were summoned. They defended their pursuits, not with rage, but with reason. The Force, they argued, held more than the Jedi were willing to explore. Suppression, they claimed, was fear disguised as virtue. When the Council demanded surrender, the alchemists refused. Exile followed. They did not disappear. Far from Coruscant, in hollowed sanctuaries and underground vaults, they continued their work. They gathered followers, former Jedi, outcast adepts, curious seekers drawn to power unspoken. They called themselves nothing at first. They needed no title, but the Order gave them one, whispered with dread, fallen. Their numbers swelled, their methods deepened. Life was reshaped. Beasts were molded through pain into weapons of terror. Kyber crystals, once sacred, were bled into crimson. Some experimented on themselves, fusing armor to bone, storing memories within flesh. They believed the Force could be wielded, not followed. That balance was a myth clung to by those afraid to rise. The Jedi responded with force. What followed could not be contained in a single battle. For 100 years, war simmered across sectors. Armies rose beneath banners that bore no Republic crest. Jedi confronted those they had once trained. Skirmishes bled into sieges. Entire systems flickered between light and shadow. The galaxy trembled, not from conquest, but from revelation. These were not monsters. They were former guardians. At the heart of their stronghold stood a temple built in contradiction. Malachor became the forge of their heresy. Its obsidian towers reached toward lightning-split skies. Its caverns pulsed with corrupted force energy. Here, in defiance of all restraint, they created superweapons bound to ritual. One device drew energy from pain, fed by endless echoes of suffering carved into the stone around it. Coruscant sent fleets. The final confrontation turned sky to ash. Jedi forces descended in waves. Blades met blades above temples that cried out through the Force. Malachor fractured. The surface cracked. A cataclysmic weapon was triggered. Some said by accident, others by intention. Those who witnessed it lived only long enough to speak of silence, of gravity bending, of time collapsing inward. When it ended, nothing stood. Those who survived returned to the temple changed. The Order mourned its victory. What had been learned could not be unlearned. The corruption, though buried, had found shape. A new name emerged from the ashes of defeat. Sith. It meant flame. It meant fracture. The survivors fled into unknown space, scattering like sparks on the wind. Each carried their own vision, their own cruelty. Some perished in the void. Others found worlds unguarded by Jedi oversight. There, they built temples not of stone, but of will. They no longer asked questions. They imposed answers. The Jedi reinforced their teachings. New restrictions were placed on study. Forbidden knowledge was locked away. But cracks remained. Each generation remembered differently. Some saw the 100-year darkness as tragedy, others as warning. And deep within the records, unread, unnamed, the memory of Malachor endured. Sith ideology was not born of hatred alone. It was born of inquiry, twisted by hunger, sealed by war. It did not begin as rebellion. It began as belief. Not all who followed the light could endure its weight. Flames still clung to broken towers when silence reclaimed the battlefield. In the heart of the Republic, where Jedi law once held unshaken ground, the victors did not celebrate. Their breath came slow, their wounds still open. They had won the war, but not without cost. Not without betrayal that would linger in their veins like venom. Those cast out from the Order had not fallen in battle. They were banished, their names erased from archives, their legacies severed by decree. These were not warriors lacking strength. They were masters of the Force, once seated in high chambers, now called heretics for chasing what others feared. Their heresy was knowledge. Forbidden alchemy, rituals to bend life, methods to shatter death. They did not see darkness in their pursuit, only a fuller view of the Force. But the Council disagreed. Peace had become dogma. Curiosity was recast as sin. So they left. Their ships drifted from known stars into sectors uncharted by Republic maps. One by one, the exiles disappeared beyond hyperspace lanes into space where signals failed and charts turned to myth. They did not wander aimlessly. A call reached them, faint, ancient, full of hunger. It came from a world wreathed in blood-colored dust. Korriban waited. Beneath twin moons and canyoned cliffs, the land whispered secrets in tongues not heard for millennia. Tombs older than memory loomed across desert plains. Black obelisks jutted from sand like broken teeth. In this place, power slept beneath stone. The exiles found life there, not civilized, not weak, Sith, a red-skinned people steeped in sorcery and strength. Their connection to the Force was unlike anything the exiles had seen. It did not come through meditation, but through will. Not calm, but chaos. The native Sith were warriors, mystics, kings of a shattered realm, and they saw in the newcomers not invaders, but gods. The bond was not forged through diplomacy. It was conquest masked as worship, seduction cloaked in prophecy. The exiles took Sith titles, claimed Sith blood through ritual, and shaped a new empire from bones of reverence. Their teachings filled temples. Their names became commandments. Among them rose a leader, Ajunta Pal. He had once debated in Jedi halls, his voice tempered by logic. On Korriban, his voice summoned storms. His blade, now red, bore the shape of his fall. His followers crowned him not as a servant of the Force, but as its master. Under his command, the Sith Empire was born. Palaces rose from stone carved with memory. Cities took root near the tombs, fed by blood and bound by decree. A new code emerged, not to suppress emotion, but to wield it. Fear became power. Passion became strength. Chains were not broken. They were reforged as tools. The Force, once whispered in balance, now thundered in command. For centuries, the Sith Empire expanded in silence, its growth hidden by distance and darkness. It built fleets, trained assassins, perfected weapons steeped in cruelty. On the surface, it appeared distant from the Republic's reach. But it never stopped watching. It never stopped hungering. On Korriban, the line between life and death blurred. Spirits of ancient Sith lingered within their tombs, their knowledge etched into sarcophagi and holocrons alike. New acolytes knelt before stone faces, seeking whispers from those long turned to dust. These were not illusions. They were remnants, ghosts who remembered every exile, every wound, every promise left unfulfilled. Among the Sith, immortality became obsession. Power surpassed generations. Legacy mattered only as fuel for domination. Ajunta Pal did not live forever, but his teachings remained. Later generations named him a Dark Lord. Some revered him. Others sought to outdo him. None forgot him. His story was not one of peace lost, but of clarity found through exile. What the Jedi had rejected, the Sith had embraced. They were no longer fallen Jedi. They were something else entirely, no longer bound to the teachings of Coruscant, no longer measured by Republic standards. They had become the shadow the Jedi dared not speak aloud. That shadow would not rest. Beyond the outer rim, the dark did not hide. It reigned. Smoke clung to the horizon like memory made solid. Across worlds old and revered, the tide of war rose, carrying with it names whispered in dread. For centuries, the Sith had remained in shadows, sharpening doctrine, raising fleets, studying pain. When they struck, it was not with warning, it was with certainty. Coruscant, jewel of the Republic, felt the tremor first. Ambassadors vanished. Trade routes fell silent. Entire sectors blinked out of contact. Then the sky darkened. Sith warships cut through the void like blades meant for worlds. Their weapon was not only fire, but belief. Belief that the Jedi had grown weak in peace, dulled by doctrine. Republic forces rallied in defense, but strategy could not contain fury born of exile. The Sith came to reclaim legacy, not to share it. Jedi temples across the core mobilized. Battle meditation spread through fleets like a net of calm woven by masters whose minds bled under strain. Younglings too small for armor were ushered into hidden vaults beneath temples. Jedi who had once taught diplomacy now rode into war, sabers drawn and resolve burning. Ossus stood at the heart of Jedi knowledge, a sanctuary more than a fortress. Its libraries held texts older than planets. Vaults carved into stone protected holocrons encoded with philosophies too dangerous to forget. When news came of the Sith armada approaching, the council hesitated. Defend or evacuate? They chose both. Scholars burned pages they could not carry. Guardians uploaded what they could to data crystals, encrypted and sealed. Initiates formed lines under the watch of knights, prepared to flee should the walls fall. But time betrayed them. The skies above Ossus turned red. Starfire rained down, cutting through stone and sand alike. The libraries cracked. Towers collapsed. Temples ignited from within as dark alchemy met ancient defense. Jedi fell in circles around young ones they refused to leave. The Force shimmered through broken windows, a final breath before silence. In that moment, history became ash. Coruscant endured, shielded by fleets and the sacrifice of 1,000 nameless pilots. Its temple shook, but did not fall. Korriban, distant and cruel, stood untouched. The Sith called it sacred. Their lords stood atop tombs and watched as flames consumed their enemies past. Not all Jedi retreated. Some struck back with precision, others with desperation. The war stretched across decades, not measured by years, but by scars on star maps. Entire systems turned red with the blood of belief. Convictions shattered under the weight of reality. There were victories, brief and bitter. There were losses that hollowed the order to its roots. On Dantooine, a temple rose again. On Arcania, Jedi and Sith clashed in icebound ruins where even the Force seemed brittle. Names etched into walls became mantras for surviving students. Exar Kun, Nagasado, Freedon Nad, each a Sith Lord who once held light and then let it burn. None struck deeper than Exar Kun. Once a Jedi, his ambition grew teeth. He journeyed to forbidden tombs, drank from the well of secrets buried by the Order, and returned with power that cracked stone beneath his feet. He seduced followers not with lies, but with truths the Jedi refused to speak. Power, he argued, should not be feared. It should be claimed. He fell, as all Sith do, but not before turning temples to tombs and masters to dust. On Yavin 4, his spirit remained, tethered to stones blackened by ritual. Jedi tried to cleanse it. None succeeded. Even in ruin, Ossus left behind fragments. Crystals buried in rock still sang when held. Pages scorched at the edges still hummed with quiet wisdom. Some believed the Force wept for what was lost. Others said it simply adapted. Jedi rebuilt. Not with triumph, but with memory. The Order changed, more cautious, less trusting of passion, more fearful of its own reflection. Lightsabers, once shaped for ceremony, grew sharper. Their wielders learned new forms, techniques suited not for duels of honor, but wars of survival. In secret corners of the galaxy, Sith survivors buried themselves in empires behind empires. They waited. They always waited. The Force did not declare sides. It moved through ruin and renewal alike. In fire and ruin, the Force wept, but balance did not break. Onderon had long been a world of unrest. Jungle choked its cities, and beasts stalked the gaps between civilization and chaos. When war stirred again, the Jedi were summoned not to mediate, but to intervene. Among them stood Ulic Keldroma, bold and unshaken, a warrior of unmatched promise whose blade had never faltered in battle. He believed in justice, in peace, but he also believed that peace could be forced into place if enough strength held it. During the conflict, an ambush twisted the tide. Sith poison sank into Ulic's veins, not to kill, but to mark him. The wound was invisible to healers. No poultice, no meditation could cleanse what had taken root. Something ancient had noticed him, and it did not intend to let go. The spirit of a Sith Lord, Freedon Nad, whispered from tombs left unsealed. His voice did not command, it coaxed. Ulic listened, first in dreams, then in waking thoughts. Anger, once a brief flicker, found foothold. When Jedi leaders hesitated to confront the growing Sith threat on the edges of Republic space, Ulic left on his own. He would go undercover, he claimed. He would bring the darkness down from within. That lie held just long enough for him to believe it himself. On the world of Sinagar, he stood before the leaders of the Krath, a Sith cult clothed in aristocracy and rebellion. He infiltrated their ranks. He fought beside them. Each battle blurred intent. When blood ran in the streets, he justified it. The mission had not changed, but the voice in his mind grew louder. In time, he no longer acted. he chose. The title of Dark Lord passed to him without resistance, not in ritual, but in reality. When Nomi Sunrider, fellow Jedi, once confidant, now witness, confronted him, she found not deception, but belief. He had fallen not by force, but by conviction. Exar Kun, another Jedi turned Sith, joined with Ulic in a pact that would stretch the galaxy's seams. Temples were shattered, Jedi outposts fell to fire. Ossus bled anew. Yet not all within Ulic had hardened. He hesitated when his brother Kay met him on a battlefield. The younger Jedi refused to strike. He only asked Ulic to come home. The blade that answered should not have moved, but it did. Kay died in his brother's arms. The silence after was not triumph. It was horror. Nomi arrived too late. Her grief ignited a force deeper than vengeance. She severed Ulic from the Force, not through blade or curse, but through will. His connection dimmed to nothing. For the first time since childhood, he could not feel the current that shaped his every step. The war faded. The Sith tide receded. Ulic was not imprisoned. He vanished. Years passed. Records marked him as a fallen knight, his fate unknown. But on Renvar, among frozen cliffs and quiet wind, a figure wandered. No longer warrior, no longer Sith. Just a man, trying to forget the echo of a name. The snow did not judge him. The wind did not whisper accusations. Here he built no fortress, no shrine, only silence. One day, a visitor arrived, a young Jedi, Vima Sunrider, daughter of Nomi. She came not with questions, but with hope. She asked him to teach her. He refused, then relented. Their days were few. He shared memories more than techniques, stories more than strategy. She learned not just how to hold a saber, but why one must choose when to raise it at all. In her presence, Ulic remembered the man he had tried to be. But peace did not last. A bounty hunter tracked him to the cliffs. A bolt flew. Ulic fell. His body gave way, simple and silent. When Vima called for help, none answered. But the Force shimmered around the fallen Jedi, soft, silver, whole. His body vanished. The snow covered the ground again. His footprints remained until the wind took them. Yet those who studied the path of Ulic Keldroma would one day walk slower, speak softer, and remember that redemption, however fleeting, had shape. Some who fall do not vanish. They leave behind warnings carved in pain. Dantooine's grasslands, once stretched in peace, brushed by wind and the quiet hum of Jedi teachings. Beneath its gentle horizon, an enclave stood carved in stone, filled with quiet halls where truth was sought, not declared. This was where Revan learned to listen, and it was here he learned to question. He had been a prodigy, quick with both mind and saber, charismatic, bright. But it was the Mandalorian Wars that turned promise into crisis. The Republic called for aid. The Jedi Council hesitated. Revan answered. He did not march alone. Jedi followed him, drawn by cause and by conviction. Among them stood Alec, who would be known later as Malak, devoted, loyal, and shaped by Revan's gravity. Together, they led a splinter group, defying the Council's silence and diving into war. The conflict was brutal. Mandalore's warriors burned planets, enslaved systems, dared the galaxy to stop them. Revan met them with steel, strategy, and growing darkness. Victory came, but it was costly. At Malachor 5, a superweapon ended the war. Its activation shattered a world and something inside its commander. What began as defiance twisted into obsession. Revan and Malak vanished into the unknown regions, chasing whispers of ancient power. There they encountered the remnants of an empire built on shadows, the Sith of legend, not yet dead. What happened in those stars was never fully told. But when they returned, they were no longer Jedi. The Republic, still bleeding from war, faced its former champions, now crowned as Dark Lords. Revan wore a mask. Its purpose was practical at first, a symbol of protection. Then it became something else. A barrier, a throne, a face reshaped by purpose. Malak, once brother in arms, bowed but never forgot his place in the shadow. Power united them, but pride would divide. Their war was swift, brutal, and surgical. Jedi temples fell. Republic fleets crumbled. Those who once called them friends could not reconcile what they had become. Yet within Revan's ranks, not all followed blindly. Something of the old self lingered behind the mask. The Council, desperate and divided, struck in secret. A small team captured Revan during a mission. Malak, sensing opportunity, betrayed him, firing on his flagship and leaving his master for dead. But Revan did not die. Brought to the Jedi, broken and fading, he was healed, his memories reshaped. His past became a silence. He awoke as a blank slate under watchful eyes, trained once more not as a general, but as a student. From that silence, Revan began again. Guided by a Jedi named Bastila Shan, he retraced his own forgotten steps. Each world visited brought memories closer. Each confrontation with Malak twisted the truth tighter. The Republic did not know it had tied its hope to the architect of its fall. When truth returned, it came not with fury, but with clarity. Revan remembered everything: his rise, his fall, the bodies, the crowns, the voices of those he led to slaughter, but he did not return to darkness, nor did he retreat to guilt. He chose to act, fully aware of what he had been and what he must stop. He confronted Malak on the Star Forge, a station of impossible power built to feed the war machine. Their duel burned with history. Malak, proud and furious, struck with all the betrayal he'd ever swallowed. Revan answered not with righteousness, but with sorrow. In the end, the mask fell. The forge was destroyed. And Revan, the man who had once knelt before the dark, chose disappearance over throne. He left no command, no empire, only questions. Legends say he sought the origin of the Sith threat, that he returned to the unknown regions not to rule, but to prevent a greater darkness from rising. What he found there, none truly knew, only that he walked away from history, carrying both sword and burden. On Dantooine, the Enclave was rebuilt. Its stones knew his name, though it was rarely spoken. Jedi still walked those paths. Some remembered him with fear, others with reverence, most with unease. Revan had been many things: hero, traitor, savior, ghost. But above all, he had been choice made flesh. Victory tastes bitter when served from a fractured soul. Ash still drifted over Dantooine. The Jedi Enclave, once a haven of thought and restraint, now lay broken. Its walls crumbled, its archives scattered to the wind. The grasslands no longer hummed with peace. What remained of the Order had fled, fragmented and uncertain. The Jedi Civil War had ended, but no one could say who had truly won. Revan disappeared into the void, his choices buried beneath myth. Malak perished aboard the Starforge, leaving no successor. The Republic survived, though thinned and limping. Yet the Jedi did not celebrate. They mourned. Across the galaxy, Jedi vanished. Some fell in battle, others were hunted. A few turned away from the code, burdened by choices they could not defend. The Council, fractured by inaction and regret, grew silent. Their light flickered beneath layers of secrecy, retreating into forgotten places. In the stillness that followed, 3 figures emerged from the edges of ruin. They did not wear the robes of warriors. They wore absence like armor. Darth Nihilus drifted between worlds, consuming life as though the galaxy itself were prey. Darth Sion moved through the wreckage, his body broken beyond recognition, held together by pain and hatred alone. Darth Trier, once Jedi Master Kreia, hid in the hollow beneath Malachor V, whispering truths that splintered minds. Together, they formed the Sith triumvirate, not bound by rule, but by silence, survival, and sorrow. Each saw the Jedi not simply as opponents, but as remnants to be erased. The war, to them, had not ended. It had only quieted. Malachor V had not healed. The planet groaned under layers of darkness, its crust warped by ancient superweapons and broken oaths. It became the Triumvirate's refuge, a scar too deep for the Force to mend. There they plotted not conquest, but erasure. Jedi were hunted, not in armies, but in shadows. One by one they fell. Libraries were destroyed, temples defiled, names forgotten. Few realized the scope until it was nearly complete. But one returned. The exile, once a Jedi general, once a commander at Malachor, had walked away from the Order after the final battle, carrying silence like a shroud. The Council had cast judgment, severed her connection to the Force, and turned their backs. Yet, she survived. In the years that followed, she wandered unseen, her memories fragmented, her power dormant. She awoke not to glory, but necessity. Something pulled her back. Perhaps guilt, perhaps fate, a ship, a crew. Questions left unanswered. The Force, once muted, stirred again at her presence. As she traveled, she did not gather warriors. She found wounds, a soldier broken by loyalty, a seer blinded by visions, a general with no army. Each one followed her, not because of destiny, but because of the truth she carried, that something still mattered, that redemption was not reserved for those who had never erred. Her path led to Talos 4, a world trying to rebuild, caught between hope and sabotage. There, she faced Atris, once a historian, now a relic of the very pride that had doomed the Jedi. Their confrontation cracked open what the Order had become, isolated, fearful, and chained by self-made rules. Beyond Telos, the exile descended again into Malakor's abyss. The Sith awaited her. Darth Sion attacked not with strategy, but persistence. His immortality, a curse he wielded like a blade. Each time he fell, he rose again. It was not strength that defeated him, but understanding. The exile saw him not as invincible, but as unwilling to let go. When he chose to release his pain, he finally found rest. Darth Nihilus brought hunger. A void made flesh. Entire planets had perished to feed his need. But his power was not infinite. The exile, once severed from the Force, stood before him and remained whole. Her resistance was not defiance. It was emptiness turned into choice. Nihilus, finding nothing left to consume, withered. Darth Trier remained. She had taught the exile, shaped her, broken her truths, and reshaped them with questions. Their final meeting was not a duel, but a reckoning. Kreia had believed the Force itself was flawed, a will too cruel to trust. Yet the exile, who had once lost everything it offered, now walked in its current with grace. Their blades crossed, but it was philosophy that bled. Kreia fell at last, her secrets scattered like ash across Malakor's endless chasms. The triumvirate collapsed. The Jedi, though few, would begin again. The exile vanished soon after. Some say she followed Revan into the unknown. Others believe she laid down her saber and walked a quieter path. What she left behind was not doctrine, but proof. Even in ruin, the Force remained, and from those who truly listened, light would stir once more. Where wounds are left untreated, silence festers into shadow. Light moved through the galaxy not as a blade, but as a balm. In the quiet centuries before the Republic's twilight, a golden era unfolded. The Jedi were not generals. They were guides, negotiators, healers. Their sabers hung quietly at their sides, rarely drawn, rarely needed. The outer rim, once known only by its distance and danger, began to stir with purpose. Stars long isolated by fear now shimmered under the care of peacekeepers clad in white and gold. Their ships, bore no sigils of conquest, only hope. They traveled not as conquerors, but as witnesses, called to where balance wavered and trust struggled to root. At the heart of this expansion stood the Starlight beacon. Suspended among stars, half temple and half station, it hummed with promise. Its towers radiated gentle light across hyperspace lanes, a guiding signal for travelers, refugees, traders, and emissaries. Within its halls, Jedi walked alongside diplomats and doctors. Archivists transcribed histories that had never before been recorded. Younglings laughed in training gardens, overlooking systems no one had dared visit for generations. Master Avar Kriss listened to the Force as melody. Her leadership flowed not through command, but harmony. She directed Jedi not with orders, but with instinct, aligning each night where their song could best be heard. Stellan Gios stood nearby, embodying structure and wisdom. Elzar Mann chased possibilities others feared to dream. Together, they held a balance unspoken but deeply felt. The High Council supported their vision. Coruscant watched with pride as the frontier became less a line and more a meeting place. Local governments rose with Jedi guidance, not beneath them. The Nihil had not yet struck. The Nameless had not yet whispered. For a time it seemed the darkness had forgotten how to move. Peace brought with it quiet trials. Not all Jedi thrived without battle. Some felt adrift in stillness. Others questioned their role in a galaxy that no longer cried out in pain. Temples bloomed across distant worlds, each one unique to the cultures it welcomed. On Jeddah, pilgrims and philosophers gathered. On Elfrona, Jedi trained beside the children of settlers. On Vrant Tarnum, Force rituals mingled with native rites, overseen with care. Tensions never vanished completely. Banditry lingered in the shadows. Systems once neglected by the core still felt the sting of disparity. But now, when conflict sparked, Jedi arrived not as executioners, but as calm. Their methods varied. Some sat in courts. Others walked marketplaces, speaking in quiet tones to elders and agitators alike. A saber remained an answer, but only if every other path had broken. Even the Force seemed gentler in those years. It pulsed in the roots of wild forests and shimmered on oceans untouched by machines. Jedi spoke of dreams not filled with warning, but with vision. The living Force grew stronger in song, in motion, in instinct. The unifying Force whispered of a vast design, still forming, still kind. Padawans trained with patience. Lightsabers were crafted with reverence, their crystals drawn from Ilum's heart without fear. The bond between master and apprentice deepened beyond technique. It became legacy, shared and nurtured like a flame handed down. The galaxy began to believe, not in dominance, not in perfection, but in the possibility of connection across systems once left in silence. Children born under this light did not know the sound of planetary sieges. Traders feared taxes more than pirates. Diplomats returned home with compromises instead of casualties. The Starlight beacon stood for all of it. In its highest chamber, Jedi meditated beneath the stars. Some listened for distant cries. Others simply breathed. Above them, hyperspace lanes pulsed with ships moving between core and frontier, their destinations written in charts, newly drawn. On a platform overlooking the station's curve, a young knight set her first steps into the galaxy. Her robes bore no rank, but her gaze held clarity. She had trained in temples where no war had reached. Her saber hummed softly at her side, not as threat, but as promise. Her path would lead far. Some would call her a hero. Others would forget her name. Yet in that moment, she stood as all Jedi once stood, rooted in calm, listening. The High Republic was not a myth. It was lived, quietly, bravely, moment by moment. Even as its golden thread stretched thin, the light it cast remained real. Peace spread far, but its edge was fragile, felt first in the stars. Clouds formed without warning. They moved not with nature, but with intent. Across the outer rim, worlds that had basked in newfound connection began to shiver. Trade convoys vanished. Settlements sent distress calls that ended mid-breath. From the silence came chaos, wearing no uniform, carrying no crest. They called themselves the Nihil. Masked marauders, they struck like lightning, then vanished. Their ships ignored hyperspace lanes, breaking through space with unnatural precision. Worlds that had once trusted in the guidance of Starlight beacon now turned to their own weapons. Refugees poured into sectors once thought safe. The High Republic felt the edges of its promise begin to fray. The Jedi responded quickly. Masters and knights deployed from temple outposts, not as diplomats, but defenders. Yet this enemy moved differently. It did not hold territory. It did not negotiate. It left no trail. Every system hit bore the same marks: wreckage, confusion, and stories of shadows that screamed. On Elphrona, a family was taken. Jedi followed the signs, only to find themselves surrounded. The Nihil did not fear their sabers. They had studied them. They understood their reach. Ambush became their doctrine. Surprise became their blade. Avar Kriss, leading the mission, saw the danger ripple before it struck. She fought through it. Others did not. Marchion Ro watched from beyond the storm. He held no counsel, wore no crown. His authority came from whispers and secrets, passed down through masks and bloodlines. The Nihil followed him because he gave them freedom, to burn, to steal, to drown the stars in noise. He offered no dream, only release. His gaze turned not just to ships or planets, but to the Force itself. He sought something deeper. Within the shadows of his flagship, Ro kept a cage. Inside, something ancient stirred. The Jedi did not yet know its name, but Ro believed it would break them, not through violence, but through fear. The Jedi Order, still rooted in peacekeeping, now stood in a position unfamiliar. They had to hunt. Patrols shifted into battle groups. Meditation chambers grew quiet. Younglings asked why the stars trembled. Teachers had few answers. For the first time in a generation, The High Council debated not philosophy, but survival. Loden Greatstorm, a master known for warmth and courage, vanished during a skirmish. His absence became a wound across the Order. Bel Zetifar, his Padawan, searched through ruins and fire. What they found was not a body, but echoes, traps, messages scratched into walls meant to disorient. The Nihil did not merely attack, they disassembled. The Jedi began to fracture in approach. Some, like Elzar Mann, pushed the limits of their insight. He sought visions, walked edges others feared. Others, like Stellan Gios, clung tighter to structure, believing only discipline could hold the line. Avar Kriss tried to harmonize them all, but even melody strains when notes clash. Starlight Beacon became more than a symbol. It turned into command. Supplies moved through it. Orders were issued from it. Jedi and Republic alike depended on its signal to coordinate. But symbols, however radiant, attract storms. Martian Rowe saw it as a target. He understood that to shake the Republic, one must dim its light. And to wound the Jedi, one must make them question whether their light could reach at all. Worlds like Dalna and Vrant Tarnum became testing grounds. Jedi outposts were raided not for victory, but for message. Holocrons were shattered, archives burned, families of diplomats taken. Each attack struck deeper into the spine of belief. Still the Order held. They rescued who they could, healed where they must. Yet more than once, Jedi stared into the eyes of those they had saved and saw no gratitude, only fear. The Nihil spread like smoke, unpredictable, suffocating. Not all Jedi returned from the Rim. Some fell not to weapons, but to doubt. The Force still answered their calls, but its voice now trembled. In the Senate, Chancellor Lina So spoke of unity. She commissioned more beacons, more fleets, more hope. But beneath every plan lay a quiet question. Could ideals withstand what had no face? Within the Force, tremors grew. Visions turned colder. Younglings dreamed of endless storms. Masters meditated deeper, seeking clarity, but found only turbulence. The Jedi had built their order in balance. The Nihil had arrived to tilt the scale, not toward darkness, but toward collapse. Peace had never been permanent. The Force flowed, and always would. Yet even its brightest lights flickered when tested. The Nihil would not destroy the Republic in one blow. They would erode it, breath by breath, until it forgot how to stand. The Force binds, but even light cannot hold back every tide. High above the storm-worn world of Eiram, the stars held steady. Starlight Beacon hovered in orbit, luminous and vast, a crown of steel and promise. Within its chambers, Jedi walked beside citizens, medics worked beside diplomats, and corridors hummed with the gentle rhythm of peace-given structure. For a time, it was everything the High Republic believed itself to be. Visible, reachable, alive. But peace, even when crafted with care, is never immune to gravity. Warning came too late. Systems began to fail in sequence. not with chaos, but with intention. Lights dimmed in the medical wing, communications garbled in the central tower, doors locked not to protect, but to trap. What began as a malfunction turned quickly into betrayal. Sabotage ran deep, layered over weeks, buried in code and steel. Marchion-Ro had prepared for this. He did not bring an army. He brought precision. Agents planted across departments, masked as workers, advisors, maintenance crew. One had served in the beacon's kitchen. Another had studied its security schematics. Each acted at the same hour. Each flipped a switch that no one else saw. In the control core, panic built. Jedi rushed to contain what they could. Elzar Mann stood at the heart of it, hands pressed against failing interfaces, calling through the Force for clarity that refused to come. He reached for patterns, tried to feel intentions beyond the moment, but all he found was drowning noise. The beacon's pulse slowed, its guidance system stuttered, gravity anchors unlocked. Then the station began to fall, not fast, not violently. Slowly, as if resisting the inevitability of its descent. It tilted from geosynchronous orbit, dragged by its own weight. Inside, evac teams mobilized. Children herded into hangars. Droids rerouted power to keep hallways lit. Republic officers transmitted alerts across systems, begging for ships to assist. But the Nihil had timed the event with surgical cruelty. Nearby sectors suffered interference, routes jammed with false emergencies. Help could not arrive in time. Avar Kriss coordinated from the northern spire. Her voice, steady over intercoms, guided Jedi and civilians alike. She issued no orders of despair, only directions, clear and immediate. She found lost younglings, recalibrated lifts, pushed debris aside with the Force where needed. In every act, she carried the burden of keeping the light upright while it tilted into darkness. Below, Irem watched in stunned silence. Ships hovered, unsure. Crowds gathered near oceans, eyes turned skyward. The beacon, symbol of protection, now fell toward them like a broken promise. Some prayed, some fled. Others simply stood, holding hands, caught between awe and fear. In the hangar bay, Bel Zettifar searched for his lost friend. Loden Greatstorm had been gone too long, swallowed by prior Nihil attacks. Bel refused to believe he had fallen. Every evacuation shuttle filled felt like a clock winding down. He stayed until alarms warned of pressure collapse. He helped an elderly navigator onto the last outbound vessel, then turned back, breath sharp with unfinished hope. The fall accelerated. Control systems failed one by one. Artificial gravity flickered. Hallways bent under strain. Oxygen levels dipped across decks. The final message from the beacon's network broadcast not a call for help, but a song, composed by a child who once visited the station and had recorded it as a gift. It played softly as fire spread along the central shaft. In her final transmission, Avar Kriss whispered, "Not farewell, but thanks." She did not speak of victory, only of memory. Then silence claimed her signal. The station struck atmosphere moments later. From Eram's surface, it looked like a falling star. Blue streaks turned orange, then red. Fragments peeled away, glowing briefly before vanishing. The largest section, housing the Jedi archives and command center, burned brightest as it descended. It broke apart above the ocean, scattered like glass into the waves. A wave of pressure followed. Cities near the coast braced. Some structures cracked. Communication grids blacked out. But the world held. The people, scarred but breathing, watched the smoke rise. In time, ashes drifted across the sea. The Republic mourned. Holocanals broadcast tributes, statues commissioned, flags flown at half-mast across core and rim. But grief did not unify. It fractured. Some blamed the Jedi, others accused the Senate. Committees formed, debates raged, trust faltered. The High Republic's golden age dimmed. Jedi survivors retreated to temple enclaves. Council sessions turned tense. Missions delayed. Voices once harmonious began to splinter. In private chambers, masters argued not about direction, but about purpose. And in corners of the galaxy, darkness watched with satisfaction. Starlight Beacon had not simply fallen. It had been broken, and what fell once could fall again. Flames mark the edge of every golden age. A long time ago, the Force whispered a prophecy. Quiet and veiled, its words unsettled even the most disciplined Jedi minds. Some dismissed it as a myth, too dangerous to weigh. Others watched for its signs in silence, wary of what fulfillment might cost. The Council archived the texts deep within the temple. They called it the Chosen One prophecy, someone born to bring balance to the Force. The outer rim seldom touched Coruscant's polished halls, but one day it sent a tremor. On the desert world of Tatooine, heat shimmered across dunes like ghost fire. Beneath twin suns, a boy raced through scrapyards, laughter chasing wind. His name was Anakin. He built machines from ruins, tuned pod racers beyond their limits, and spoke kindly to droids that never responded. Shmi, his mother, watched him grow without father or heritage. Her only certainty, her son, was different. Qui-Gon Jinn recognized that difference the moment he looked into the boy's eyes. The Force stirred violently around him, raw, deep, chaotic in its brilliance. The child's blood carried a count no Jedi had recorded, no father listed, no logical path for how he came to be. Qui-Gon saw more than mystery. He saw destiny. The Council did not welcome it. On Coruscant, masters gathered in quiet debate. Mace Windu questioned the danger. Ki-Adi-Mundi doubted the timing. Yoda, ancient and burdened, sensed fear in the boy. Fear too large for a child. Fear that would not pass easily. But Qui-Gon stood firm. To him, the boy was not merely gifted. He was the one the ancient verses spoke of. Obi-Wan, then still a Padawan, watched his master with unease. He trusted Qui-Gon's instincts, but he knew the consequences of bending Jedi laws. The Order trained from infancy, not from childhood. Attachments were severed early. Anakin, though young, had already lived enough to form roots, and roots made it harder to let go. Still, Qui-Gon brought the boy before the council. He presented his findings, his belief, his certainty. When the council refused to train Anakin, Qui-Gon announced he would take him as his Padawan regardless. A breach, a declaration, a risk. But fate shifted the moment Maul's blade struck. The Sith had returned, not in whispers or shadows, but with crimson fire. Qui-Gon fell on Naboo, his last words carried to Obi-Wan with quiet desperation. "Train the boy. Promise me." Obi-Wan, grieving and reluctant, kept that vow. The ceremony was brief. Jedi customs allowed no mourning. The temple glowed with sunbeams filtered through high windows. Anakin stood among them, his gaze lifted, his hands folded. A child from dust and chains, now stepping into corridors of marble and legacy. He did not understand the whispers, the way masters paused when he entered, the way robes fluttered aside as he passed. He sensed their unease. He memorized their caution. And yet, he wanted to prove them wrong, to be worthy, to earn the place given at the cost of Qui-Gon's life. In private, Yoda meditated longer. The Force no longer flowed as it had. Turbulence pressed against the old currents. Balance, once held in gentle tension, now trembled. Anakin stood at its center, too bright, too vast, a storm not yet formed. Anakin trained quickly. He moved through saber drills with uncanny speed. He absorbed history faster than any in his generation. His bond with Obi-Wan grew, sometimes as brothers, sometimes as fire and stone. Yet beneath his skill, cracks formed. He dreamed of his mother. He longed for freedom that the Order never offered. He questioned things too early. He wanted too much. Coruscant held him like a vessel never built for the tide it housed. In the temple archives, a copy of the prophecy remained. A child born of no father, one who would bring balance. It did not say when. It did not say how. It did not say what must burn for balance to rise. Jedi walked past the text without pause. Some had stopped believing it. Others prayed they'd never see it fulfilled. On Tatooine, wind buried a scrap of cloth that once hung from a pod racer. Shmi Skywalker looked up at the sky and wondered whether her son was safe. Her arms felt the absence he left, like an echo that never faded. And in the shadows of the galaxy, a presence stirred, watching, waiting. A child born in sand stirred the echoes of a promise long feared. Geonosis burned in the sky like a wound. Sand swallowed metal and flesh alike, and the air crackled with the thunder of walkers and gunships. Jedi, once diplomats and scholars, fought at the head of clone battalions, lightsabers clashing with droid alloy in clouds of dust. Their robes, once symbols of serenity, were streaked with soot and ash. War had found the Order. What began as a rescue mission became a campaign. Jedi fell. Clones died by the thousands. The Republic, caught unprepared, gave the Order what it had never sought: authority to lead an army. Lightsabers became instruments of command. Council chambers darkened with strategies instead of teachings. Back on Coruscant, the temple echoed differently. Once filled with quiet meditation and the hum of younglings in practice, now its halls trembled with war briefings and the return of bodies draped in silence. The archives expanded, but with maps of siege lines and weapon schematics. Holocrons were consulted less for wisdom than for tactical precedent. Obi-Wan Kenobi led campaigns across the Mid-Rim. Mace Windu struck deep into separatist-controlled systems. Ki Adi-Mundi, Shak Ti, Plo Koon. Each Jedi Master took a sector, dividing responsibility as if slicing a galaxy into manageable grief. Anakin Skywalker rose fast, his victories decisive, his methods questioned. His presence inspired troops, but concern lingered in council meetings where no one spoke openly of it. The clones followed without hesitation. Grown in tanks, named by one another, their loyalty ran deeper than programming. To the Jedi, they looked with something like reverence. To each other, they offered only silent understanding. The war turned them from numbers to brothers. Yet the Jedi rarely looked behind those helmets long enough to see the men beneath. Younglings noticed the change first. Their lessons shortened. Lightsaber drills now focused on combat formations. History classes began to mention the separatist threat. Some children whispered in the halls, unsure whether to feel pride or dread. Their masters, burdened and weary, offered only hollow assurances. Master Yoda remained in the temple more often than others. He watched. He listened. Through meditation, he sought the current of the Force, but its rhythm had grown murky. Each day felt stretched thin, every vision tinged with fracture. He feared they were drifting from something vital, but no words he spoke could halt the current. Chancellor Palpatine met often with Jedi commanders. His presence in the temple, once ceremonial, became common. He praised their efforts. He requested counsel. He placed trust in Anakin. The council, unsettled, offered seats in name but withheld decisions in truth. The gap widened with each passing month, hidden beneath layers of diplomacy and protocol. Whispers grew louder. Jedi were no longer seen as monks or mystics. To the Republic citizens, they had become warriors, symbols of strength, but also of escalation. On outer worlds, statues of Jedi stood beside clone barracks. Recruitment hollows displayed their lightsabers in slow motion, frozen in mid-strike. The war needed heroes. The Republic gave them faces. Behind closed doors, doubt took root. Some masters questioned the ethics of command. Others feared what the Order was becoming. The code still echoed in classrooms, but its words held less meaning when weighed against orders and losses. Attachment had always been forbidden, but grief, silent and collective, lingered in the halls without name. Ahsoka Tano watched her friends die. She led missions her heart was not ready for. She trained under Anakin, learned to win at all costs, and bore the weight of choices that blurred the line between right and necessary. Her story was not rare. Elsewhere, Jedi like Quinlan Vos and Depa Billaba walked along edges no one had taught them to navigate. Mercy became difficult. Precision, even more so. The war sharpened them all, but not always in the ways they needed. Still, the Jedi fought. Every system retaken brought fleeting peace. Every duel won delayed collapse. The temple stood tall, but its roots cracked beneath the strain. Rituals remained, but with thinner attendance. Meditation halls often sat empty. The Force, once a constant presence, now felt distant, like a wind remembered more than felt. Clones died with Jedi names on their lips. Jedi died with questions buried in their silence. In time, they stopped asking whether they should fight. The war had become everything. Their role, no longer a matter of belief, became expectation, a duty pressed into every breath. Peace had not arrived, only strategy. As generals, they forgot the weight of stillness. It came without warning. Across 1,000 stars, in canyons and corridors, the Jedi turned to their allies with trust still resting in their gaze. In that final breath before betrayal, there was no suspicion, only purpose, only mission, only movement toward peace. Then came the code. Execute Order 66. Clones paused mid-step. Their helmets offered no hint of hesitation, no sorrow, only silence before the storm. Across jungles, space stations, arid plains, and temple halls, the same command echoed. And one by one, lightsabers ignited for the last time. On Felucia, Ayla Secura fell before she turned her head. On Salukami, Stas Ali never saw the moment coming. On Maigito and Kaito Nemoidia, Ki Adi Mundi and Plo Koon perished with confusion frozen into their final motion, leading, not fleeing. Each Jedi was not slain for weakness, but for trust. The temple on Coruscant, long a sanctuary of learning and balance, became a war zone. Its spires caught flame. Younglings ran through archive halls, unsure if the thunder outside was war or training. The sky above dimmed not from sunset, but from fire rising. Clones poured through the entrance with precision. They were not invaders. They had once knelt for blessings in those same halls. Now they advanced, rifles raised, hearts silent. They did not question. They obeyed. At the head of their storm walked a shadow not dressed in black. Yet. Anakin Skywalker, once prophesied to bring balance, now returned to the temple not as a guardian, but as a blade. His eyes no longer searched for light. They demanded silence. The children knew him. They did not fear him. They asked what was happening. They waited for him to lead. He did. Elsewhere, scattered Jedi reached out across the currents of the Force, only to feel nothing in return. Where once a chorus had guided them, now only absence lingered. Temple beacons fell quiet. Warnings arrived too late. Yoda, on Kashyyyk, stumbled mid-march. Pain struck his chest before the blasters turned toward him. He did not hesitate. His blade met betrayal with sorrow. In that swamp of roots and smoke, the truth of the moment bloomed. The Order was dying, not from without, but within. Obi-Wan Kenobi, wounded and adrift, escaped his own execution by the narrowest margin. As fire consumed the outer systems, he returned to the temple to find ruin. Hallways cracked, statues fallen, bodies left unburied. The archive, long guarded by Jocasta Nu, offered no wisdom, only ashes. What remained of the Jedi could not hold together. Bail Organa, arriving under pretense, bore witness to the carnage. He did not speak of it to the Senate. He said only that darkness had risen. The galaxy, unaware of the full truth, cheered. The war had ended. Peace, manufactured and poisoned, was declared. The clone troopers, soldiers of valor in every newsreel, were praised for ending a threat no one could name. The Jedi, once protectors, now wore the mask of conspirators. A new empire rose not in opposition to the Jedi, but on the claim of protecting the people from them. Palpatine, now Emperor, addressed the Senate in thunderous tones. He declared the Jedi traitors, saboteurs, architects of war. The crowd erupted in applause. No one questioned why so many had died so quickly. No one asked what proof had been offered. Fear had already taken root. And fear listens easily. Few Jedi survived. Those who did vanished, not out of cowardice, but out of necessity. Hunted by inquisitors, tracked through the Force, erased from records. They moved through old tunnels, beneath cities, across stars unnamed. The lightsabers that once hummed in open battle now remained buried, their blades sleeping beneath cloaks and rubble. The temple stood in ruin, and still it stood. Palpatine did not destroy it. He twisted it. The sanctuary of the light became a fortress of shadows. New officers walked its floors. New doctrine filled its chambers. The holocrons that survived were sealed away or destroyed. Jedi texts vanished into vaults. The teachings of compassion, of calm, of balance were replaced with order, with might, with submission. The galaxy forgot the truth. It was taught a different story. In a lonely cell on Coruscant, Grogu sat in silence. In exile on Dagobah, Yoda carved no monuments. On desert sands, Obi-Wan waited without name. They each carried memory not as hope, but as burden. The Jedi Order had fallen, but the Force did not fade. It stirred in places untouched by maps, in dreams, in children born without explanation, in whispers carried by wind on distant worlds. The temple darkened, but the Force did not dim. The Order had collapsed, yet the Force did not forget. On Tatooine's edge, beyond the reach of empires or memory, a figure watched from heat-stained hills. He bore no rank now, no title, only a silence shaped by grief. Obi-Wan Kenobi buried his name beneath sandstorms and distance. He lingered near the boy who carried more than blood. He carried the hope of something not yet healed. Kenobi kept no records. He left no trails. His lightsaber remained hidden, a relic of a voice no longer welcome in the galaxy. But in the quiet, he listened, to wind, to stars, to moments where the Force still stirred beneath ruin. Though he walked alone, he was never unanchored. The past followed him, not to haunt, but to teach. Far away, in a place forgotten even by maps, another exile made a home among the mists. Yoda, once Grand Master, now moved through trees that whispered secrets only he could hear. Dagobah bore no monuments. Its power was primal, unshaped. And that was why he chose it. Not to hide from darkness, but to confront it. The swamp pulsed with raw force. Here, he was no leader, no teacher. He was a witness, watching time pass, sensing fragments of futures that refused to settle. The echo of the Jedi still rang in his breath, but his days were spent not in meditation, but in waiting. Not for salvation, but for readiness. Others survived as fragments. Ahsoka Tano, no longer Jedi yet never fully severed from its path, wandered the stars under no banner. She moved through conflict with a blade hidden and voice firm. She helped where she could, fought when needed, but never claimed the title she had once walked away from. Her path was her own, lit by choices forged in fire. On Lothal, the Force whispered to a child who didn't yet understand its name. Ezra Bridger's connection was instinctual, untrained, unspoken, but real. In a world ruled by blaster and credits, he found himself drawn to something older. The Jedi who found him, Kanan Jarrus, did not wear robes or recite ancient codes. He carried trauma beneath calm, a survivor who never asked to teach. Kanan had once been Caleb Dume, a Padawan when the sky fell. He had run, hidden, changed his name. For years he pretended the Force had left him. But when Ezra stood before him, confused and afraid, something within reawakened. Not the Order, not tradition, only the truth that knowledge, if not shared, becomes shadow. Together, they trained not in temples, but aboard ships, between skirmishes, in brief pauses between threats. The Force was their compass. Their trials came not from constructed rituals, but from choices made under fire. Sabine, Hera, Zeb, they were not Jedi, yet they became part of the story. Through them, the old ways began to flicker again. Hidden across the stars, artifacts slept. Jedi texts sealed in vaults that hadn't been touched in decades. Holocrons pulsed faintly, their voices trapped in glass and crystal, waiting for questions to be asked once more. The Empire searched for them, not to learn, but to erase. Inquisitors stalked the night, blades humming with crimson certainty. Former Jedi turned hunters. They spoke no creed. They offered no mercy. Where the Force once flowed freely, they sowed dread. Survivors knew to run, to vanish, to adapt. Those who fought did so with the understanding that memory itself had become a battlefield. The galaxy grew colder toward the old traditions. Most did not remember what the Jedi had stood for. They remembered the war, the politics, the fall. The propaganda had worked. The order became a myth spoken of in caution, not reverence. But myths endure. A child on a forgotten world levitated a stone without touching it. A traveler paused when their footsteps echoed like memories. Somewhere on Jeddah, a monk lit incense before a shrine that bore no name. These were not Jedi. They were threads, thin, scattered, but unbroken. And in the silence between empires, the Force moved without need for approval. It reached beyond legacy. It whispered not to restore what had been, but to prepare what would come. Those who carried its memory did not seek temples. They sought clarity. The Jedi were gone in name, but their truth lingered in acts of compassion, in restraint shown during conflict, in hands that healed instead of harmed. Faint though they were, these echoes refused to vanish. A few lights still flickered, waiting for a breath to reignite them. Water broke gently against the cliffs of Achto, where moss-veiled ruins stood like teeth forgotten by time. Wind moved between stone huts and leafless trees, bringing salt and silence. The first Jedi temple lay there, not in grandeur, but in humility. It had no throne, only memory. And in that place of origin, Luke Skywalker chose to vanish. He did not flee war. He fled failure. Beneath a cracked sky, he turned inward. Not to forget the Jedi, but to ask what they had become. He had rebuilt their teachings, trained new minds, believed in restoration. And still, darkness returned, not from the outside, but from within. His own blood, Ben Solo, rose under the name Kylo Ren. The pattern had repeated, and Luke no longer trusted his ability to break it. He studied ancient texts in the quiet of dawn, pages worn by unknown hands. Lessons lost to time whispered through his fingertips, not as commands, but as questions. Was peace something to enforce? Was balance a goal, or a state one learned to accept? The Force stirred around him, but he no longer sought to wield it. He let it breathe. When Rey arrived, bearing no lineage, no expectation beyond survival, Luke saw both danger and possibility. She carried raw power, untamed and searching. He hesitated. He pushed her away, fearing a pattern he could not face again. But the island would not let her be ignored, and neither would the Force. She climbed ancient steps, trained in rain, fought shadows with a staff and a will that refused to break. The cave beneath the island called to her, offered truths with no comfort. Luke watched as she stepped toward what others would have fled. And in that, he saw something the Jedi had long forgotten: curiosity without arrogance. He taught her, reluctantly at first, then sincerely, not with doctrines, but with glimpses. The Force, he told her, did not belong to the Jedi. It was life itself, light and dark, breath and decay, hope and loss. What mattered was not control. It was understanding. In time, Rey left, and Luke remained. But when the spark of resistance dimmed, when hope cracked beneath crimson armor and starfire, he returned, not in body, but as myth, On Crate's salt-crusted fields, Luke faced the First Order alone. His image stood firm against blaster fire and wrath, untouchable, immovable. He gave the galaxy time to breathe. His final gift was not destruction. It was delay. Then he faded, not into death, but into legacy. Rey carried his teachings into fire. She faced Exegol's thunder, the throne of the Sith reborn. Palpatine, long thought dissolved, clung to life through ritual and vessel. The voices of the past had not gone silent. They had waited. Yet in that storm, Rey stood alone, until she didn't. Across the galaxy, the Force awakened. Jedi long past spoke through memory, through instinct, through faith. Not to instruct, to remind. She held two sabers, one hers, one belonging to those who came before. Together, they struck down not a man, but the idea that darkness was eternal. Rey did not take a throne. She walked ruins, gathered fragments, chose a name not by birthright, but by belonging. Luke's legacy lived not in temples, it lived in that choice. Elsewhere, the Jedi returned, not as an order, but as echoes in motion. Grogu, small yet attuned, trained in moments of stillness. Ahsoka searched not for students, but for truths left scattered. Ghosts of the Clone Wars moved between stars, carrying fragments of an old light. The Jedi no longer sought dominion, they sought meaning. In time, others would rise, not in robes, not in titles, but in balance. Some would touch the Force without ever naming it. Others would speak the word Jedi as memory, not doctrine. The old ways did not return. They transformed. Just as the galaxy did. Just as Luke did. He watched now from beyond. A presence felt when needed. A guide offered in silence. His form no longer bound by gravity or age. In the Force he had found not escape, but peace. His voice became part of the current. Rey stood once on Tatooine, beneath twin suns, with two sabers in hand and a legacy behind her. She buried them, not in farewell, but in gratitude. Beneath the sand, the past rested. Above it, something new began. The Jedi did not vanish, they changed form like the Force itself.